year 44 AC, considering the trials Westeros had faced over the last few years, was a peaceful one compared to what had come before. But despite this supposed peace, the maesters who wrote down this very history of those times all agree the smell of blood and fire still hung heavy in the air. There was a sense of unease across the realm that never truly abated. Maegor Targaryen sat the Iron Throne, now uncontested after the death of Aegon the Uncrowned, and the faith now placated. As his red keep rose around him, some did begin to relax, but for most his court was a grim and cheerless place, despite the presence of his 3 queens. Some argue it was perhaps because of them. Each night he summoned one of his wives to his bed, yet despite bedding 3 young and healthy women, he remained childless, with no heirs but for the sons and daughters of his brother Aenys. While Maegor did usurp the throne from Aegon the Uncrowned, he legitimately took it via the right of conquest after the Battle of the God's Eye. If we follow that line of thought, this would make his brother's next eldest son his legal heir, in this case, the captive Prince Viserys. It was now vital for the stability of Maegor's rule. He had his own child, better yet a son, and soon. People had also begun to call him Maegor the Cruel, and others Kinslayer as well, though it was death to say either of these things in his hearing. In Oldtown, the ancient High Septon put in place by Maegor died, and another was raised up in his place. Though he spoke no word against the king or his 3 queens, the enmity between Maegor and the faith still endured under the surface. While this new High Septon was no longer Maegor's puppet, he would not directly move against the king. After the outlawing, hundreds of poor fellows had been hunted down and slain, their scalps delivered to King's Landing for the bounty, but thousands more still roamed the woods and hedges and the wild places of the 7 kingdoms, cursing the Targaryens with their every breath. One more extreme band even crowned their own High Septon, in the form of a bearded brute named Septon Moon. And a few warriors' sons still endured, led by their grand captain, Ser Joffrey Doggett, the Red Dog of the Hills, his fire to fight raging on harder than ever before after Maegor had burned most of his kin in retaliation. Outlawed and condemned, the Order no longer had the strength to meet the king's men in open battle, so the Red Dog sent them out in the guise of hedge knights to hunt down and slay Targaryen loyalists, the traitors to the faith. The first victim was Sir Morgan Hightower, a former member of the Order who turned cloak in Oldtown, cut down and butchered on the road to Honeyholt. The aged Lord Merryweather was next to die, followed by Lord Peake's son and heir, Davos Darkland's aged father, even blind Jon Hogg, all men who had fought for the king at the God's Eye. Though the bounty of the head of a warrior's son was a golden dragon, the small folk and peasants of the realm hid and protected most of them, remembering what they had once been. On Dragonstone, the Dowager Queen Visenya Targaryen had finally started to show some true signs that her age was catching up to her. By 44 AC, she was 73 years of age, and had grown thin and haggard, the flesh melting from her bones. Queen Alyssa, the wife of the late King Aenys, remained on the island as well, with her youngest son Jaehaerys and youngest daughter Alyssa, prisoners in all but name, given the freedom of the castle, but always with a guard present and a watchful eye from Visenya. Some rumours say Visenya even spent time with the young Jaehaerys and Alyssa, telling them tales of the conquest and their late grandfather and grandmother. If this were the case, no historical record exists that attests to it. Prince Viserys, the eldest surviving son of Aenys and Alyssa, was summoned to court by Maegor. Like his elder brother, he was a promising lad of 15 years. Beloved by the commons, Viserys was made the king's squire, but always with a Kingsguard knight for a shadow, to keep him well away from plots and treasons. He was Maegor's heir after all, but at the same time kept close, effectively as a hostage, should Alyssa or her kin attempt to rise against Maegor. For a brief while in 44 AC, it seemed as if the king might soon have that son he desired so desperately to carry on his legacy. Queen Alys Harroway, his second wife, announced she was with child, and the court rejoiced, with Maegor the most gleeful of them. The new Grand Maester, Desmond, confined Queen Alys to her bed as she grew great with child, as was the norm with highborn ladies. He also took direct charge of her care, assisted by 2 scepters and a midwife, and the Queen's 2 sisters, Jane and Hannah. Maegor insisted that his other wives serve the pregnant queen as well, a decree that is rumoured to not have sat well with both Queen Cerys Hightower or Tyenna of Pentos. During her 3rd month of confinement to her bed, Alys began to bleed heavily from the womb and lost the child in quick succession. When King Maegor came to see the stillbirth, he was horrified to find the babe, the boy he had so desired, was more monster than child, with twisted limbs and a huge head and no eyes. "This cannot be my son," he roared in anguish. Then his grief turned to fury as he ordered the immediate execution of the midwives and scepters who he charged with the Queen's care, and Grand Maester Desmond as well, sparing only Alys's sisters. It was said that Maegor was seated upon the Iron Throne with the head of the Grand Maester in his hands when Queen Tyenna came to tell him he had been deceived. The child was in fact not his seed. Seeing Queen Cerys Hightower return to court, older than her, and bitter, and childless, Alys Harroway had begun to fear that the same fate awaited her unless she gave the king a son. So she turned to her lord father, the hand of the king. On the nights when the king was sharing a bed with Queen Cerys or Queen Tyenna, Lord Lucas Harroway sent men to his daughter's bed to get her with child. Maegor initially refused to believe this. He told Tyenna she was nothing more than a jealous witch and baron, throwing the Grand Maester's head at her. "Spiders do not lie," the mistress of whisperers replied curtly. She handed the king a list. Written on this list was the names of 20 alleged men who had given their seed to Queen Alys. Old men, young men, handsome men, homely men, knights and squires, lords and servants, even grooms and smiths and singers. The king's hand had cast a wide net indeed. The men had only one thing in common. All were men of proven virility, known to have fathered many healthy children. Under torture, all but 2 of the 20 confessed. One, a father of 12, still had the gold paid to him by Lord Harroway for his services. The questioning was carried out swiftly and secretly, so Lord Harroway and Queen Alys had no inkling of the king's suspicions, until one day the King's Guard burst in on them. Dragged from her bed, Queen Alys saw her sisters killed before her eyes as they tried to protect her. Her father, who was inspecting the Tower of the Hand, was flung from its roof to smash upon the stones below. Lord Harroway's sons, brothers, nephews were all taken as well, thrown onto the spikes that lined the dry moat of the rising Maegor's holdfast. Some took hours to die. The simple-minded fool Horace Harroway lingered for days. The 20 names on Queen Tyenna's list soon joined them, and then another dozen men, named by the first 20. The worst death was reserved for Queen Alys Harroway herself, who was given over to her fellow queen, Tyenna, for torment. We do not know what occurred in the dungeons of the Red Keep. Suffice to say it took her a long time to die, the better part of a fortnight, and that Maegor himself was present for it all, a witness to her agony. After her death, the queen's body was cut into 7 pieces and mounted upon spikes above the 7 gates of King's Landing, where they remained until they rotted away. King Maegor then departed the city himself, assembling a strong force of knights and men-at-arms, marching on Harrenhal, the seat of House Harroway, to complete the Harroway's destruction. The great castle on the God's Eye was lightly held, and its Castellan, a nephew of Lord Lucas and a cousin of the late Queen, opened the gates of the king's approach. But surrender did not save him. Maegor put the entire garrison to the sword, along with every man and woman and child he found to have a drop of Harroway blood. He then marched to Lord Harroway's town on the Trident and did the same there. In the aftermath of the bloodletting, men began to say that Harrenhal was cursed, for every lordly house to hold it had come to a bad and bloody end. Nonetheless, many ambitious king's men coveted Black Harren's mighty seat, with its broad and fertile lands, so many that King Maegor grew weary of their games, and decreed that Harrenhal should go to the strongest of them. Thus did 23 knights of the king's household fight with sword and mace and lance amidst the blood-soaked streets of Lord Harroway's town. Sir Walton Towers emerged victorious, and Maegor named him the new Lord of Harrenhal. But the melee had been a savage affair, and Sir Walton did not live long enough to enjoy his lordship, dying of his wounds within 2 weeks. Harrenhal then passed to his eldest son, though its dominions were left much diminished, as the king granted Lord Harroway's town to Lord Altron Butterwell, and the rest of Harroway's holdings to Lord Darnold Darry.